You just now done 16. Okay. Everyone else? Marie? Oh, you're the champion. Yashodharani? 20. You're the Dwatsit pet. And 4 more to 25. Anyway, okay. I trust you. I'm sure you'll do it. Okay, devotees, so here we go. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Srimati Bhakti Vedanta Swaminiti Namane Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pracharne Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Pastyachadeshatarne Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadha Shivas Adi Gaura Bhaktivinoda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. So devotees, we just finished chapter 34, and we're moving now into chapter 35, which is titled, This Remote Corner of the World. Although Srila Prabhupada had been away from America for a year, sure, that's amazing. His Krishna consciousness movement had flourished by Krishna's grace, and the devotees' attachment for him had grown. His disciples, having heard reports and seen photos of his triumphant tour of India, had felt inspired to increase their own preaching. In each American center, new devotees had been joining and were learning Prabhupada's teachings from the senior devotees. Already accepting Srila Prabhupada as their spiritual master, hundreds of newcomers were eagerly awaiting initiation. Whoa, really? Hundreds. How different from Prabhupada's first arrival in America alone in 1965. Walking the cold streets with no money and no temple, he had been ignored. Sometimes he had thought of quitting, taking a boat back to India, but he had maintained absolute faith. And now, less than 6 years later, in dozens of ISKCON centers throughout America, hundreds of disciples worshipped him and would throng ecstatically to receive him. I must admit, it was pretty amazing when Prabhupada would arrive. Gosh, it was pretty amazing. Yeah. Devotees would just go wild. Los Angeles, June 26th, 1971. When Prabhupada had left Los Angeles a year ago, the political turmoil there had troubled his mind. Means amongst the devotees, you remember that? You remember that, I think. Prabhupada is God. But on returning, he found the devotees recovered. Faithfully, they were executing his orders to chant publicly, distribute Back to Godhead magazine, and worship the deity of Rukmini Dwarkadish. In the gorgeously decorated Los Angeles temple, Prabhupada performed a large initiation ceremony, accepting dozens of new disciples. On June 27th, Srila Prabhupada traveled from Los Angeles to San Francisco for the 5th annual Ratha Yatra. 200 followers met him at the airport. "How many devotees do you have?" a reporter asked. "Unlimited," Prabhupada said. "Some admit and some don't admit. Admit you're a servant of Lord Krishna and your life will be a success." After 2 days in San Francisco, Prabhupada returned to Los Angeles and on July 16th flew to Detroit. Bhagavan Das, Prabhupada's governing body secretary for the Midwest, had preached vigorously in his zone, opening centers in St. Louis, Chicago, and other cities. Almost 300 devotees, most of whom had never seen Prabhupada, assembled at the Detroit airport to receive him. Sureshwara. Devotees had come from all over the Midwestern United States and Eastern Canada to greet Srila Prabhupada at Detroit's Metro Airport. A red and gold throne stood in the center of the reception room, and the devotees were chanting Hare Krishna and dancing, awaiting Prabhupada's arrival. When the plane finally landed, all bliss broke loose. The disembarkation dolly joined the plane, but we couldn't see Srila Prabhupada. I became anxious. When would he enter the room? Suddenly a cry went up, and I looked around. Devotees were bowing down. Urukrama. Srila Prabhupada entered the room as bright as the sun, and everyone immediately prostrated themselves on the floor. Not like the other times when we bowed down together, but this was like an overwhelming force hit us, and we were thrown to our knees. When I stood up, I couldn't believe my eyes. There was Prabhupada. Almost everyone in the room was crying. Indradyumna, that's Indradyumna Maharaj. Indradyumna, my first glimpse of Prabhupada was through the lens of my camera, and I thought he looked just like he did in his pictures. I had only seen him in pictures, and now he looked just like the pictures, only moving. All the devotees began to cry and fall to the ground. It was a transcendental, emotional thing. I was looking, watching all the older devotees, how much love they had for Srila Prabhupada, and I was feeling unqualified and sinful. Urukrama. Prabhupada appeared powerful, yet at the same time delicate and soft, like a very wonderful flower. As he moved along very slowly, the devotees lined up and made an aisle for him to walk. He walked up to Kirtanananda Maharaj, put a garland around him, and embraced him. Kirtanananda Maharaj was crying tears of ecstasy, and he looked like a little boy next to his father. Then Prabhupada went to Bhagavan and patted him on the head. Then he embraced Bhagavan, who also began to weep like a little boy who has just seen his father after a very long time. Vishvakarma. I arrived late. When I got there, I was afraid to look at Srila Prabhupada because I felt too fallen to look upon the pure representative of the Lord. So I stayed behind a wall of devotees, afraid to look. Finally, I realized this is ridiculous, as the perfection of the eyes is to behold the form of Krishna's pure devotee. I raised my head, and I saw him sitting on his Vyasasan, drinking a cup of water. Never had I seen anyone drink water like that, without touching the goblet to their mouth. The water poured from the cup like a shining silver stream, straight into Srila Prabhupada's mouth and throat, and he finished the water in a few swallows. He appeared to be a grand sage from the spiritual realm, and as everyone chanted, he looked around at the devotees, smiling with great pleasure. Everyone was overwhelmed with transcendental joy, and I joined with over half the devotees in weeping. Unquote. Prabhupada began speaking. This is very satisfactory that so many devotees, boys and girls, are taking part in this great movement, Krishna consciousness movement. It is a very important movement because it is correcting the human society. It is a great defect in the modern civilization. People are accepting this body as self. And based on this mistake in the foundation, everything is going wrong. Accepting this body as the self is the beginning of all problems. The great philosophers, scientists, theologians, and thoughtful men do not know what is the defect. Recently I was in Moscow, so I had a nice talk with a professor of Indology, Professor Kotovsky. He was speaking that Swamiji, after this annihilation of this body, everything is finished. So I was astonished that a learned professor, posing himself in a very responsible post, had no idea about the soul and the body, how they are different, how the soul is migrating from one body to another. Yeah. You know, sometimes what devotees do is they call some non-devotee to the front and ask him or tell him, okay, point to your chest, point to your head, point to your arm, point to your leg, now point to you. And they usually go like that. And then we say, no, you said that's your chest. And then they may go like, no, you said that's your head. And they become confused. But then it's quite easy to see, to appreciate that we are not these bodies. It's the first lesson, as Prabhupada said. As Prabhupada spoke, a voice announced over the public address system that the departure lounge had to be cleared for the next flight. They're speaking about ourselves, Prabhupada asked. We shall stop? All right, let's go. That evening, in the temple room of Detroit's ISKCON Center, Srila Prabhupada sat on his Vyasasan before the deities of Lord Jagannath, Subhadra and Balaram. While a devotee led the kirtan, Prabhupada played his kartals, looking around the room at his disciples. He was nodding his head, pleased to see them dancing and chanting. After the kirtan, he lectured, quote, just see how their characters are being formed, how they are becoming purified, how their faces are becoming brighter. It is practical. So our request is, take full advantage of the center. You come here. It is being guided by one of my best disciples, Bhagavan Das. so he and others will help you. Please come regularly to this temple and take advantage of it. After his lecture, Prabhupada asked for questions. Bahulashva raised his hand. Srila Prabhupada, what is the thing that will please you the most? Chant Hare Krishna, Prabhupada replied. And the devotees spontaneously cried out, Jai, Jai! Prabhupada, that is the simplest thing. You are chanting. I'm very much pleased. That's all. I came to your country to chant, that you would also chant along with me. You are helping me by chanting, so I am pleased. But this tendency is very nice, that you want to please me. That is very good. And to please me is not very difficult. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu said that, under my order, every one of you go preach and become spiritual master. And what is that order? The order is, whomever you meet, you talk to him about Krishna. Prabhupada emphasized that if one wanted to preach and represent Krishna, then he could not change the message of Krishna, but must repeat what Krishna says. I've come here for the first time, Prabhupada continued, but before me, Bhagavan Das, he has organized. And what is his credit? He has presented things as I told him. That's all. This is wonderful. In Los Angeles also a program is going on very nicely. My disciple in charge there is Karanda. He is present here. He is simply doing what I instruct, and he is doing very nicely, first class. Everyone who comes, they come and are enchanted by the temple, with the activities, with the disciples. So this is the way. This is called Parampara system. Don't concoct, unquote. As Prabhupada was leaving the temple that evening, the mother of one of his disciples approached him. You know, she said, these boys actually worship you. Worship in italics. Yes, Prabhupada said, that is our system. I am also worshipping my Guru Maharaj. The devotees around Prabhupada looked at one another and smiled. Although the woman had tried to make it appear extraordinary that Prabhupada's disciples worshipped him, Prabhupada had taken it casually. One must worship the Guru. It is the Vaishnav standard, and nothing to wonder about. Srila Prabhupada had so many centers in the United States that to visit each one was not practical. During his year in India, many new centers had opened on the West Coast, in Florida, Texas, the Midwest, the East. Prabhupada said he had more establishments than a wealthy businessman and more residences. Were he to stay in each of his houses, quote-unquote houses he equipped, he couldn't visit them all in a year. And especially to Indian audiences, he would cite the monthly expenditures for his centers. Though proud of ISKCON's growth, Prabhupada was never proud on his own account. He never considered using ISKCON for his own enjoyment. Whenever he visited a center, his quarters were usually an apartment arranged at the last minute, often fraught with annoyances like noisy neighbors and incompetent cooks. At 75 years, his constant traveling was hardly an arrangement for his health and comfort. Prabhupada never felt complacent over the small successes society enjoyed, nor would he claim the credit for that success. Rather, he said it was due to the mercy of his spiritual master and the previous spiritual masters. ISKCON still had but little influence in the world. People considered it a small, exotic religious sect. But by the blessings of the previous acharyas, it was growing. Prabhupada was initiating more and more disciples, and the potential was unlimited. One of Lord Chaitanya's chief followers, Jiva Goswami, had warned that a spiritual master should not accept many disciples. Many neophyte disciples would bring suffering to the spiritual master. Yet on Prabhupada's United States tour during the summer of 1971, he initiated more disciples than ever before. As Lord Chaitanya's empowered representative, he wanted to increase the number of devotees more and more. He was aware of the risk, but he was also aware of the great need. As he had written in the Nectar of Devotion, quote, "The one point is that without increasing the number of disciples, there is no propagation of the cult of Krishna consciousness. Therefore, sometimes even at a risk, a sannyasi in the line of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu may accept even a person who is not thoroughly fit to become a disciple. Later on, by the mercy of such a bona fide spiritual master, the disciple is gradually elevated. However, if one increases the number of disciples simply for some prestige or false honor, he will surely fall down in the matter of executing Krishna consciousness." Srila Prabhupada's test of a prospective disciple's readiness for initiation was standard. The disciple must have followed the 4 rules and chanted 16 rounds daily for at least 6 months and have the recommendation of the temple president and local GBC secretary. Prabhupada accepted anyone who fulfilled these conditions, and he expected the disciple to remain sincere and true to the vows of initiation. Despite Prabhupada's growing number of disciples, he intimately touched each of their hearts. Although a few disciples enjoyed extended association with him, most of his hundreds of disciples saw him only from afar. Yet each of them was certain that Prabhupada was his own. Each could say, "My spiritual master." Each could say, "Prabhupada," and feel close to their dearest friend and well-wisher, the one who was saving them from death. They knew that Prabhupada was the direct representative of Krishna and the most empowered acharya of Lord Chaitanya's message. Those who were sincere knew without doubt that their connection with Prabhupada was transcendental, not to be interrupted or limited by physical or geographical considerations. If they surrendered to Prabhupada's orders, Krishna within their hearts would help them advance. If they were sincere, Krishna would help them become better disciples of Srila Prabhupada. The devotees' love for Prabhupada was not a vague sentiment. He was engaging them in Krishna's service, and they were directly experiencing the transcendental results. Only a devotee, however, could understand Prabhupada's personality or the depth of his disciples' attraction for him or the debt they owed him. No wonder onlookers at the Detroit airport had not understood the apparently delirious devotees in their blissful reception of Srila Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Any comment or question? Okay. Anukul Ji, Ajal. Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.